Hi, guys, and welcome to another edition of Bell to Bells Outside the Ropes with me, Kelsi. That's me. And what are we talking about today? Well, we're talking about 90s Nickelodeon. I'm so excited, but before we get there, let me remind you guys what this show is about. Why is this non-wrestling show on a wrestling website? Well, when your favorite wrestlers step out of the ring and outside the ropes and drop their gimmicks, they like a lot of the same things that we do. Pop culture topics, nostalgia topics, and all kinds of fun video games, things. They like reading books, they like watching movies and TV. So they're really just like us. And this is where we're going to talk about those topics that everyone can relate to, whether you like wrestling or you don't. I'm sure there's a topic here that we're going to cover eventually for everybody. But today, it's 90s Nick. So I'm excited to get started. And plenty to discuss here. Again, like I said, 90s Nickelodeon, a wonderful time for television, a wonderful time to grow up as a kid. Lots of great shows on that channel in the 90s and even in the late 80s as well. And today we're going to cover some Twitter polls which pitted some Nickelodeon shows against each other. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We're also going to take a look at what people said on Twitter about what their top 3 favorite Nickelodeon shows were. And so we'll go through all of that. I'll give my picks, and then we're going to hear from some special guests, which we'll get to in a moment. Before we get into all of that, I do want to remind you guys, please subscribe to Bell to Bells. That's Bell to Bells, Belles. You could see it right below me on this cool looking slime key that I made for this video. So hopefully you guys will subscribe there, not only to catch my episodes of Outside the Ropes, but plenty of other great wrestling-themed videos on Bell to Bells. Please check them out. Please support them. Also check them out on Twitter as well, at Bell to Bells. Same spelling. And you could always find me on Twitter as well if you want to catch my other content at SuperKickingIt, SuperKickingIt. And without further ado, we'll do a little more plugging later on, but let's get into the nitty-gritty. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you might say, Kelsi, you already did this topic on your YouTube channel. One, you could spend flipping a year talking about Nickelodeon. Not only a year, but many years talking about Nickelodeon, which actually, we'll talk about this in a little while, but I know some guys who do talk about it and have been talking about it for a couple of years now. So you wouldn't run out of topics. So although I've covered this before on my own YouTube channel, Super Kicking It with Kelsi, Kelsi, I am going to do a whole bunch of new stuff on this video. In fact, we're not really revisiting any of the old information I covered. In the old video, it was basically just a survey of different shows that were on 90s Nick. I gave some history facts about the first Nicktoons that aired on Nick and a couple of other facts and fun trivia that I shared. And I did some Twitter polls, but this time, completely different Twitter polls, completely different topics. So I actually will continue to do 90s Nick stuff in the future on my own channel. But if you want to see that original video, check it out. Go back to Super Kicking It with Kelsi, and you could find the original Kelsi Likes Nickelodeon video. And there's some good stuff in there. This will be completely different. So if you did see that, don't worry. We're covering new stuff. All right. So the first thing I want to do is I went on Twitter. And I think this is a cool question to start with because I feel like there was so much Nickelodeon had to offer everyone. So no matter what your tastes, if you liked live action, if you liked animation, if you liked goofy, if you liked more serious, like Are You Afraid of the Dark, a little more creepy, they had something for literally every taste. And I love that about 90s Nick. And not only did they have a show for everyone, they had such an artistic channel that you could literally be entertained by just watching the commercials and what we refer to as commercial bumpers, like the little things that ran in between the shows that were really creative. You know, the singing dinos, Nick, 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 the doo-wop stuff, Nickelodeon, all kinds of really creative stuff. And man, that Nickelodeon logo, how versatile was that logo? They literally put it in the shape of anything. There was like a Nickelodeon logo in the shape of a hat, a Nickelodeon logo in the shape of a rocket, all kinds of stuff. You could go on and list all the different logos they did, which you saw on the channel in between shows all the time. So not only did Nick have great programming, they had great even commercials. You might think, who cares about a commercial? You're there for the shows, but I think that added a lot to the channel, and honestly, I feel like the style of the channel, not just the programming, but like the channel itself with all the logos, with all the different commercial bumpers, with the music style of those commercial bumpers, I feel like that influenced me and what I like in terms of decorations and colors today, and even like my style. So to me, that was really an important part of the channel and a very distinguished part of the channel because no other channel was like that. You knew when you were watching Nickelodeon. It didn't look like any other channel on TV. And again, 90s Nick really revolutionized children's TV, and we're going to talk about the players behind the scene in a little while and why they were important in making Nickelodeon different and kind of what we know today as being a historic channel, because it wasn't always like that. Like in the 80s and before, Nickelodeon wasn't the powerhouse that it became in the 90s. So the 90s were a really important time for the channel. It really is when it took off like a rocket and just kept rising and rising and got more and more popular. It was the best kids channel on all of TV by the end of the 90s. So really, it's second to none. And again, I think it influenced a lot of us 90s kids who grew up watching it. And we'll talk more about that later. But let's go to the first Twitter question without further ado. All right, so on Twitter, I asked, Blowholes, what are your top 3 90s Nickelodeon shows? Comment your choices. Lots of good picks, too. So we'll start off with 90s Court Pod. I will say on a rewatch as an adult, Pete and Pete holds up the best. Brilliantly written show. I've got to agree. Today, I watched it as an adult, and it's perfect. It doesn't get old. It doesn't seem corny. It just seems perfectly odd in a good way, where you're revisiting it, and it's like, wow, this really makes me smile and laugh still, and really holds up. And it gives you those, nostalgia feels. Double A, but not Arn Anderson. Are You Afraid of the Dark? Hey Arnold, and Rocko's Modern Life. Good choices there. Those are some really top picks. Jen at Pastel Paperback. Adventures of Pete and Pete stands the test of time. It is so weird and specific, yet in a broad and reaching way, that it's easy to rewatch and love. Clarissa is iconic, forever the coolest. My heart says Doug for animated. Doug Funny is just lovable. I love her reasoning here. It's perfectly worded and perfectly explained because you can't argue with anything she said. I do agree with her thoughts on those shows. At Derek Stark, Nick Arcade, Guts, and Legends of the Hidden Temple. So he went with the game show route there. All of his favorites are game shows. Josh, Legends of the Hidden Temple, The Ren and Stimpy Show, and Hey Arnold. Very diverse picks there. You got a game show, you got 2 animated. No other live action except for the game show, though. That's an interesting group of choices. Prime at KVNG Primetime. Well, Kenan and Kel for one, then All That, and then anything after that can fight till the death. So he doesn't care who gets the 3rd spot, but he just wants definitely Kenan and Kel and All That in there. At Kirby Pinky 23, Rugrats, Hey Arnold, and Doug. Great choices, if I do say so myself. All animated. I'm a big fan of animated Nick. Nicktoons are the best, in my opinion. There was some great live-action stuff, but I was always really into the animated stuff. At the JRAD, too many to name, and to pick 3 is almost impossible, but I'll go with Are You Afraid of the Dark, All That, and Rocko's Modern Life. Great choices. My friend Good Guy Dave, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Rugrats, Legends of the Hidden Temple. We're seeing a lot of similarities in these choices. You can definitely tell which are the most popular shows. At Taker Kid 27, Legends of the Hidden Temple, Rocko's Modern Life, Rugrats, and the honorable mention goes to Kenan and Kel. The Leighton Cassette at Leighton_the, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Salute Your Shorts, and Guts. Do you have it? At Metal_2006, Hey Dude, Wienerville, and Get the Picture. Some old school choice there with Wienerville, and very unique. Not a lot of people said these choices, so that's a good grouping right there. Daniel McDuff, Pete and Pete is for sure a win, probably my earliest encounter with surrealism that helped me get into it. Rocko's Modern Life and Are You Afraid of the Dark also played a big part in building my taste and interest when I got older. Great reasons. Jobber Rob, Kablam, All That, and Our Real Monsters. Unique choices here, no one else said Kablam. And I believe no one else said Our Real Monsters either. Those were kind of some underrated gems on Nickelodeon, if I do say so myself. I loved Kablam. It definitely gave you a variety of different things in that one show. I liked that. It was very unique, very different. Even almost every show on Nick was different from each other, and I like that. Every show on Nick kind of strived to be different and unique, and that's something awesome about 90s Nick. At old_GUI, nothing tops the adventures of Pete and Pete. Nothing! I can't really argue with that. Pete and Pete really does hold up, like everyone's been saying. At Scarlett E. Harris, Rugrats, Hey Arnold, and Alex Mack. We've got our first mention of Alex Mack here. Great choice, underrated show. And again, that is our wrap up for top 3 Nickelodeon shows from Twitter. Love to hear from you guys. I don't like to just give my opinions on what shows I like. I like to hear from you guys and get your opinions. And if you guys disagree with any of those top 3 shows from all the people from Twitter, drop your own top 3 90s Nickelodeon shows in the comments below on this YouTube video. I'd love to read your choices. And as far as me, I really love Rugrats, Rocco, and I gotta say, third could be a lot of things, but I'm gonna give it to Are You Afraid of the Dark because it's so creepy, and I actually have a lot of fun rewatching it because I started rewatching it last October. Rewatched a little bit then, rewatched a little bit this October that just passed, and hopefully I'll continue doing that around Halloween time. Not that you can't watch it other times besides October, but I just think it's very thematic for that time of year, so why not? It kind of really fits with the feel of fall time and stuff like that. But yeah, it could have been Legends of the Hidden Temple because I flippin' love that show. But definitely Rugrats and Rocco, the top 2 spots. The third one, like, there's so many things that could go there that were really, really good on 90s Nick. It's just hard to choose. I personally also really love Wild and Crazy Kids. No one ever talks about that game show. Underrated as hell. The games looked so fun. I always wanted to participate in the Wild and Crazy Kids obstacles. Like, I remember one they were sliding down this hill with all this soapy suds, or it was marshmallow fluff. I can't remember what it was, but it was definitely like this sudsy stuff. Or gooey stuff, I don't know. I mean, Nickelodeon did a lot with goo and slime, so it could have been goo for all I know, like marshmallow looking goo, I don't know. Anyway, they were sliding down these big hills and like huge inner tubes, and everyone has a team, just like Legends of the Hidden Temple. There was different colored and different animal themed teams. For Wild and Crazy Kids, it was just colors, and so you would kind of, when as a viewer, you'd watch the different colored teams and you kind of choose one you were rooting for. I would always root for like the blue because I like the color blue growing up, so I would always kind of wind up rooting for them. But yeah, man, what a great show. Doesn't ever get enough love. Everyone always kind of calls out Guts or Legends of the Hidden Temple, or even Double Dare, and they just forget about Wild and Crazy Kids. But guys, I'm here to tell you, it's good. If you don't remember it, it was a lot of fun. Alright, so here I kind of want to take a little break from the Twitter polls before there's a whole bunch more we got to get into, but I do want to take a second and throw it to 2 of my favorite people in the entire world. There is this wonderful podcast called Big Orange Couch. You could find them on any podcasting platform, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, they're on Spotify as well. Just search for Big Orange Couch. And they are the 90s Nickelodeon experts. Everyone thinks of me as someone who loves 90s Nick, and I do, but these guys just are way beyond me in terms of knowledge, in terms of the way they edit their podcast is so professional. They use like little sound clips. They've even interviewed people who have been involved at Nickelodeon in the 90s. So to me, their podcast is second to none, and they've got all kinds of different episodes. They don't just review a random episode of a show for every episode of their podcast. They do all kinds of different things. They've done creative stuff where they've written their own episodes of shows, like they've written their own Rocco, they've written their own Kenan and Kel. They've done these other episodes where they pit 2 characters or 2 shows against each other and argue which is best, and like a third guest host is there and tries to determine who argued the best for whatever entity they were arguing for, and then they crown a winner at the end of the episode. So it's just really well done show. And then they do reviews of certain episodes, and they cover it all. Like, I never really watched You Can't Do That on Television. I never really watched Hey Dude, let's say. They cover those shows as well as the more popular shows like we're talking about today, Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, Rocco. I'm going to be talking about all of those. Of course, Are You Afraid of the Dark's a huge one. That's one of their favorite shows. And in fact, Big Orange Couch talks a lot about Are You Afraid of the Dark and a lot about Pete and Pete. So if you guys are fans of those shows especially, you'll find something you can love with Big Orange Couch. But again, you could literally find all kinds of stuff you'd like, even if you didn't like those 2 shows, because they've covered everything. They've covered game shows. They had a great Versus episode where they put Guts against Legends of the Hidden Temple, and they had to argue for which one was better. I really just love their show, and they have all kinds of guest hosts. But the 2 main hosts, Joey and Andrew, I asked them actually if they would be okay with contributing some sound clips so that I could use in this video. And oh my god, I freaked out. I was so excited. I marked out, you could say, for all you wrestling fans, when they agreed to tell me some of their thoughts about 90s Nickelodeon. Basically, I asked them what makes 90s Nickelodeon so special, and what does 90s Nick mean to them? So first we'll hear from one of the hosts, Joey, then we'll hear from his other main co-host, Andrew. So here we go. Take it away, Big Orange Couch. Love you guys. Thank you so much. Here they are.
Hi, my name's Joey. I'm one of the co-hosts of Big Orange Couch with my best buddy, Andrew, and this is what Nickelodeon means to me. 90s Nickelodeon, or as I knew it as a kid, Channel 65, was an all-enveloping universe. I think the reason it means so much to me is because it allowed me to feel both included and see the world beyond my front yard. Andrew and I discuss so often how Nickelodeon made everything feel like it was for us, and we got to, whether you got to pick the programming with Stick Stickly, or even at Nick at Night. We got to play games like Nick or Treat, or live vicariously through the Super Toy Runners, Nick taking over your school, or all the game show contestants and kiddos getting slimed. It felt like democracy for kids, and that adults had no place at Nickelodeon. Nick also gave glimpses of a world that felt really big and odd and entertaining. I got to hang out at the Dude Ranch in Arizona with Hey Dude. I got to hang out in the woods with the Midnight Society and see, tales my little brain could barely comprehend. I got to go to Camp on Awana. I got to see the oddities of the suburbs in Wellsville with Pete and Pete. Nick allowed me to see diversity in a way that I didn't in my own life with families, whether it was the Darlings and Clarissa, or the Parkers and my brother and me, or the Woos and Shelby Woo. I got to experience sketch comedy through all that. There were animated shows for every type of kid. So, Rugrats and Doug for the young at heart, Ren and Stimpy and Rocko's Modern Life for the edgier among us, Hey Arnold and Angry Beavers for the lighthearted. It felt like there was something for every kid, and in retrospect, that seems like such an impossible task to have accomplished, but I would dare say they did it. And looking back, I realize it wasn't just for kids, but these shows, would stand the test of time and leave plenty for me as an adult to enjoy as well. Whether it was me as a kid flipping as quickly as I could to try to get to Channel 65, or as an adult, streaming it on Dailymotion or YouTube. Nick kind of just feels like a place where I was welcomed and got to see beyond my own world, and I think any kid should be so lucky.
Hi, I'm Andrew from the Big Orange Couch podcast. For me, part of what makes 90s Nickelodeon so special is that it was such a defining thing in that era of my life. It just always, we always had it on in my house, and all of our friends watched it. It was something that was shared between all of us. And as the years have gone on, I've discovered that it has highly influenced my tastes in TV shows and books and anything with good stories, really. And I think part of what makes Nickelodeon so special is that it's like one of the few kid-centric things that doesn't talk down to kids, but instead like celebrates them as kids, and their weirdnesses and their flaws. So I think it was just such a special kind of community of kids, where you could get away from adults, and I don't know, it felt like you had a place in the world, even as you're kind of even as you have no power anywhere else in your life. That young, it feels like you had some place to go where you could be yourself and everybody would accept that. For me, it's just been so important in the way that I've even grown up, and how I've matured as a person. There's not there. I don't think there's been anything like it really since. Something that sets it apart is that you could tell that the people involved in making all of these shows, and even the stuff between shows, really cared about what they were doing, and were trying to make this something fun that kids would really connect with. And I think they really succeeded, as evidenced by all these people who still love this stuff. It's clear that like a lot of it's written as good as anything. You think of it as just meant for kids, but really it's on par with any kind of adult TV shows or movies. Anyway, I'm just so glad that we've had the chance to revisit so much of this stuff, and that we've been able to connect with so many other fans of these shows, and share that together. It's been a really fun time.
Wow, they are just so eloquent. They literally say everything I feel about 90s Nick. They put it into words so beautifully. I could never do it like that. So their analysis is top notch, and as you could hear, just the way they talk about 90s Nick is on another level. Very smart, and again, the podcast is researched to heck, and you guys really should check it out. I can't even recommend it highly enough because it's so good. It's literally my favorite podcast, period. I don't really listen to a lot of podcasts anymore, but I listen to theirs. I haven't listened lately as much as I'd like, but I'm about to get back to it. When I'm doing my exercises, I'm going to put that back in my ears. So they are so amazing. Thank you guys so much, Joey and Andrew, for doing this and contributing your thoughts to my video and to Bell's video. Really appreciate you guys. Again, guys, please search for Big Orange Couch on any podcasting platform. Also, you can find them on Twitter at BOC Podcast. Again, at BOC Podcast. And also, they are really active on Instagram as well. And you could find them on Instagram at Orange Couch Podcast. Again, on Instagram at Orange Couch Podcast. Check it out, guys. They are so amazing. I can't say enough good things about them. We'll talk about them a little bit more in a little while. Alright, so now let's get back to the polls, and this time, what I asked people on Twitter was, in 1991, the first 3 Nicktoons aired. It was Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy, and these were a big deal because at the time, there wasn't a lot of creator-driven animated shows on TV. In fact, it was unheard of. Nickelodeon started this trend of giving the creators of these shows the power to do what they wanted, to have creative control over their own shows. So the first 3, which the creators had full control of, that aired on Nick, the first 3 original Nicktoons that Nick aired, Doug, Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy. I asked people to pick their favorite of the 3 originals, and this is what the results said. Let's take a look. Okay, as you could see, we had 156 votes. Rugrats won with 38.5% of the vote. Ren and Stimpy came in second at 32.7%, and Doug came in last at 28.8%. And let's see what people had to say, their comments. Brittany said, I don't really care for Ren and Stimpy anymore, even though I liked it as a kid. The gross out humor is just too much for me at times. However, I love Rugrats and Doug. Doug because he reminds me a lot of myself as a kid, and Rugrats always makes me laugh any day. Derek says, Doug. I resonated with Doug because he had a best friend and imagination and a beautiful dog. He just lived every teenager's life. And that's the thing, Doug was very relatable, I think, and that's why a lot of people like Doug. Mayor of Nilbog at PCH Nilbog, Ren and Stimpy because the animation style was innovative and iconic as hell. Also, you get Powdered Toast Man, the No Sir, I Don't Like It horse, the Blammo commercials, and of course the greatest earworm ever, Happy Happy Joy Joy. Yeah, Happy Happy Joy Joy does get stuck in your head, I gotta say. It does get stuck in there. Robbie Gregg, all 3 are awesome, but probably Doug if I had to choose. Shooting the Sports-ish, I will always pick Doug because daydreaming characters are my favorite. Liam at Morden 1981. Ren and Stimpy was my first taste of alt comedy. Weird, zany, kaleidoscopic, and definitely a gateway drug for mature animation. Ren and Stimpy led me down paths paved with Monty Python, The Young Ones, and much later, Jam and Big Train. Weird times. Yeah, I mean, I can't believe Ren and Stimpy was even allowed to air on Nick because, you know, it was a kid's channel. It just shows you how much freedom that the executives at Nick really did give the creators of these shows. Because Ren and Stimpy, you go back and look, it had some absurd, crazy, just insane things, and especially gross stuff too, I gotta say. So then we go to Daniel. Daniel says, Doug, he got me to eat beets, and that opening tune was just so catchy. Yeah, the opening tune, Fred Newman, who did all the music and the weird sound effects, that's just genius. I loved all the sound effects. I think that really separated Doug from the other two shows was the sound effects. That was really such a big, integrated part of the show. Chibs at Chibi Halloween, Ren and Stimpy, hands down, not a single F given when it came to storytelling. Weird characters or just flat out really gross close-ups of faces. Easily one of 90s Nick's best cartoons. Good Guy Dave, I liked all of them for different reasons. I liked Ren and Stimpy because it felt like you were watching something you shouldn't. Doug was a funny show of a relatable kid. And I loved Rugrats the best because it looked awesome and I loved the characters and the stories. At Halloween Helpin', at the time I would have said Ren and Stimpy, but over the years I think Doug has overtaken it in the rankings. Fiction Fight Forever, wrestling. I enjoyed Rugrats as a kid, but I don't think it has much to offer adults without the benefit of nostalgia. I disagree because there's a really funny little adult jokes in there. It's not like Rocco adult or Ren and Stimpy adult, but it's like little funny things that you would laugh at, like Chucky calling coffee, he thinks he's making coffee and it's mud. Tastes like mud, and he looks down, it is mud. Basically, there's a lot of little cutesy stuff that I think adults would either smirk at or laugh at from Rugrats. Werewolves Ranchero, I liked Ren and Stimpy because it was gross. My mom hated it, and I'm pretty sure Ren was Mexican. Mrs. Deathwish, all day long, happy, happy, joy, joy, so she's voting Ren and Stimpy. Great choices there. A lot of fun hearing what everyone had to say about their favorite original Nicktoon, which was their favorite out of the OG 3. I think they're all good in different ways, like some people alluded to. But if I had to pick one, I'd pick Rugrats because, one, it is nostalgic for me, but I don't think it's just about nostalgia. I think it's really, really cute, really fun, and really innocent, but in an entertaining way. So there's a lot of great stuff to Rugrats, especially if we're talking about the first 3 seasons. After that, I think it went downhill. That's just me personally. I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I just think the first 3 seasons were gold. The animation was more unique and more weird. The stories were more about the babies getting into adventures and how to get out of trouble. Whereas later, when Dill came in and the other characters came in, it was kind of like getting Dill out of trouble all the time. Whereas before, with Tommy and the gang, it was more about adventures and funny little things that were happening. And Reptar, you can't beat some of the early Reptar episodes. Oh my gosh. Halt, I am Reptar. Halt, I am Reptar. And Reptar on Ice too, that's a great episode. So much good early Rugrats episodes. Like, there's so many. You can't even shout them all out because there's so many. So again, we've been talking a little bit about the animated shows, about favorite shows in general. Now let's talk about what character or person completely embodied the feel and vibe of 90s Nickelodeon and why. You know, I gave them a few choices, and one of the choices I gave them was other. So people who weren't included in this poll, but who I said that they could shout out were people like Kel, Artie from Pete and Pete, Clarissa, Mark Summers, Amanda. But what character embodied the feel and vibe is what I was asking people for. Alright, so here are the poll results. I gave them the choice of Little Pete, Kenan Thompson, or Tommy Pickles. And again, I also had the 4th choice of other. And so 94 votes total, and Kenan won with 39.4% of the vote. Tommy Pickles comes in second with 34% of the vote. Little Pete comes in third, 19.1%, and other, like the examples I kind of listed to you guys just a second ago, that came in last with 7.4%. Let's see what people had to say. 90s Court Pod at 90s Court. Not saying it's my favorite character, but regarding the question in terms of the vibe of the 90s and vibe of Nickelodeon, it's Clarissa by a country mile. Or possibly Kirk Fogg, but he says he'll stick with Clarissa. At KVNG Primetime, I definitely think Kenan and or Kel both bring the 90s vibe rather its wardrobe or the cool factor or the items at the time, TVs, record players, etc. I really think the 90s as a whole can be summed up on this show. So yeah, Kenan and Kel, you can check out that show, and really it does feel very 90s, at least to me, and I think most people would agree. Scarlett Harris, she says Arnold to her embodies the feeling of 90s Nick. CC at CCTron says Clarissa. We got more than one vote for Clarissa here so far. Good Guy Dave says Kenan and Kel were instrumental at making 90s live action comedy work. They were natural at it, and they were awesome. Both of them added so much that they were the vibe of the 90s Nick. If you were able to recommend someone to watch 90s live action comedy, you'd recommend Kenan and Kel. And I do love Kenan and Kel. It is so funny, it is so zany, and they have great chemistry, Kenan and Kel. On screen, they just really mesh together so well. At Pinto Beans 20, early 90s is Rocco. Kids comedy with adult innuendos. It made me laugh as a kid. As an adult, it holds up and makes me laugh for reasons I never understood when I was a kid. Late 90s is Raymundo Rocket, the perpetually high single father restaurateur, pro surfer, my idol. See, I never really watched Rocket Power, but I like how he really looked up to that character and it resonated with him. Alexis says Kenan Thompson had just the right amount of wacky and popular to rep for Nickelodeon. That's true because, Kenan was everywhere in the 90s. Not only was he a big star for Nickelodeon, he did stuff outside of Nickelodeon. Like if you look at the Mighty Ducks movies, you look at Heavyweights, so he had kind of crossover and universal appeal. It wasn't just about being on Nickelodeon. Kenan really, to me, reps the 90s in general, not just Nickelodeon. You think 90s, you think Kenan. And I also think you think a few other things, but Kenan was a big part of the 90s. At Take the Bump Pod, I feel like Little Pete is peak 90s Nick. Late 80s is totally Mark Summers, though. I like that. That's a good point. Back to the Video Store at Back to the Video 1. Yes, Summers is great, but nothing says 80s Nick to me more than the dad and mom from You Can't Do That on Television. That or Jeff from Today's Special. So here we've got a shout out for You Can't Do That on Television. Again, that's more 80s, but he's referencing 80s Nick in this pick right here. So that stands up pretty well. Jen at Pastel Paperback. Clarissa, self-aware, smart, creative, offbeat, and totally aspirational. We all wanted to be Clarissa. Yet the most relatable things about her were her relationships with her family and friends. She is surprisingly normal despite being incredibly unique. I love that reasoning. It totally makes sense. And yet Clarissa, her whole look and vibe and style really screamed 90s and also really screamed 90s Nick. That's the kind of uniqueness the channel was going for and that the channel portrayed in the 90s. Jen continues on and says, I feel like that defines 90s Nick. It was totally off the wall and wild, but also felt very comfortable and relatable. Great comparison, Jen. I love that. Back to the Video Store says, he's got another comment and says, Little Pete is good for sure, but the person I think best defined both the 90s and Nick, Budnick. Hair, clothes, style, voice, slight grungy edge, but still seemed kind of nice and genuine underneath it all. Budnick all the way. That is a great answer. Very unique. No one else said this. That's a spoiler. But yeah, no one else said him. And it's a great answer, especially like the grunginess. Because yeah, there was a little bit of grunge to the 90s. He kind of exemplified all of that. Brian E. And that actor also played, of course he's talking about the actor who played Budnick, that actor also played John Connor's friend in Terminator 2. 3 scenes, but that was more than enough to earn a place in pop culture history by association. The Forsaken Torta, a travesty that, as of this tweet, Little Pete is at 17%. He wound up at 19%, but still, it is a travesty, either 17 or 19%. To me, it's too low. He paved the way for all the rest on this list, as he was one of the first of the 90s. I do agree, and to me, if you talk about zany and weird, and like what Nickelodeon did with programming, to me, Little Pete as a character exemplified how Nick was willing to go off of the wall, off the rails, and just really be strange. But somehow everyone found that appealing. You didn't have to explain what it meant or why Little Pete was the way he was. Why did he have Petunia on his forearm, a tattoo of a grown woman? Why? He's a kid. Wasn't explained, didn't matter. Why did he hang out with a man in a tight pair of tights? who thought he was a superhero. Was he imaginary? Was it real? Doesn't matter. It was accepted by kids. Kids felt entertained watching it, and they related to the show too. And so to me, Little Pete, his style, his look, and really more than anything, his crazy catchphrases, really just everything about Little Pete to me embodies 90s Nick. And again, that's kind of what I told Torta. I said, totally agree on this. Little Pete totally encapsulated the zaniness and coolness of the 90s. A kid with a tattoo, a badass hat, and unusual insults and catchphrases. No one else could be more 90s or more 90s Nick, in my opinion. Then the Forsaken Torta responded and said, correct. The Adventures of Pete and Pete really set the stage for what a 90s kid show could be. Just like you can't do that on television, set the stage for Nickelodeon in the 80s, Little Pete was the 90s personified. I love this back and forth. It really puts into words how I feel about Little Pete and how 90s he is. And finally, this is a great answer. Someone shouted out, Stick Stickly. So 90s and so 90s Nick. When you think Nick and you see that stick, it goes hand in hand and you're like, oh yeah, 90s Nickelodeon. It fits. So yeah, wonderful answers, guys. Man, you guys are incredible. I loved all the answers for sure. That was a lot of fun. And we have a few more polls. We're not done yet, actually. Specifically, we've got a poll coming up where I pitted 2 animated shows against each other. And we'll see who came out on top. And again, I'm going to revisit this in the future on my own channel because there's just not enough time in the day, in the week, in the year to talk about everything you could want to talk about 90s Nick. And again, I've already talked about it for an hour and 17 minutes in my previous video on YouTube. And heck, like I said, Big Orange Couch has talked about it for years now. And nobody is sick of talking about it yet. It's just a lot of fun. And to me, it's not just the nostalgia talking. You go back and watch some of these shows, they hold up. Like Rocco, for instance. And speaking of Rocco, that brings me to my next poll on Twitter. Alright, so on Twitter I asked people, either or, Rocco's Modern Life or Ren and Stimpy. Why? Leave comments below to be featured in this video. Both push the boundaries of children's television, but which show would you choose if you had to? The other show would cease to exist. So let's see who won this poll. Again, it's pitting Rocco against Ren and Stimpy. I think they're both really zany, both really kind of crazy, and both somewhat gross sometimes. But we'll see what you guys think. Okay, and look at the results here. 113 votes, Rocco won with 58.4% of the vote. Ren and Stimpy came in last at 41.6% of the vote. It wasn't that big of a margin that Rocco won with, but still over 10%. That's no small margin either, but I don't think it's a large one either. It's like a medium margin it won by. But yeah, I love both of these shows, and both are weird and strange for different reasons. Let's see what people had to say about their explanations of why they chose which show. At TakerKid27, I'm surprised it's this close. Rocco was a good show. Ren and Stimpy was just dumb. 90s Court Pod, Rocco, because I don't know, it's the best. Rocco had so much more amazing comedy and so much less, hey, look at this insanely crusted pus-filled eyeball. Also, Rocco won this contest when we did it, so reasons. Fan of wrestling, Noah Foster. Ooh, you making me pick one of a hell of a decision. How can I go against Happy Happy Joy Joy? But then again, Rocco's life is something anyone can relate to in certain aspects. They were not your simple kid shows for sure. I gotta give 51% of my fandom to Rocco. So just by a hair, 1% he's given Rocco the edge. I lived the 80s podcasts at lived_80s. Ren and Stimpy made me LOL and still does today. Gross, but crazy. Michael Howard. Come on, always Ren and Stimpy. They gave us Don't Whiz on the Electric Fence and the Happy Happy Joy Joy song. It had really great songs, and of course we had the Log song too, which is a wonderful song. At J Chin for Win. I liked Rocco, but really, how is there even a comparison? It's like Addams Family to the Munsters. In this case, Addams Family and Ren and Stimpy being the superior. Good Guy Dave says, I voted for Ren and Stimpy. I really love Rocco, but Ren had so many cool ideas, like the powdered toast man. Simply this, says Mandy, and she included a gif of Happy Happy Joy Joy. Russell says, I loved Rocco, but how could anyone choose it over Ren and Stimpy? Rocco was a great show. Ren and Stimpy opened a world of hilarious, terrifying, artistic possibilities and a narrative vision to a generation of weird kids, or maybe the weird kid in us all. That's a good reasoning, But again, there's a lot of differing opinions in this so far. I love how everyone has completely opposite opinions and very strong beliefs about which one's better. Mr. Fishcake, Rocco's modern life due to how smartly written it was and the issues it tackled. Derek says Rocco was better in my opinion because they had a wide variety of characters and stories and didn't cross the line into adult humor. Ren and Stimpy were a more late night comedy for me. I followed his comment up and I said, great points. I do think Rocco did cross the line into adult humor, but they did it in a way more subtle way than Ren and Stimpy. Rocco wasn't as into using shock value or gross close-ups of red eyes and so on and so forth. So, I mean, yes, I think Rocco definitely crossed the line. There's no question about it. You go back and look at some episodes now. I just rewatched it last year. It definitely crosses the line, but it does so in a subtle way where kids don't really know per se that it is crossing the line. James says, can never forget the line, would you like to buy some rubber nipples? But the way Ren said it makes it better. At talks_tad, Rocco for sure. The episode where Heifer goes to heck is still one of my favorite episodes of any animated show. Our good friend Warren at Mr. Warren Hayes. What rolls downstairs, alone or in pairs, and over your neighbor's dog. What's great for a snack and fits on your back. It's log, log, log. It's log. It's log. I'm not going to sing the rest. But yes, you get the picture. He's obviously voting for Ren and Stimpy here. And that's a solid choice. Again, the log song is iconic. It's great. You can hardly find a 90s kid who doesn't know about that song. And finally, Paul, at One Fall Paul, Ren and Stimpy was the beginning of gross shock humor in the early 90s, but I think Rocco's Modern Life perfected it and improved upon it in a way that was also marketable towards kids, which made it not only the better show, but the more marketable one. And I gotta say, he's on the same page as me. I think he's correct. I do prefer Rocco. I think Rocco is a little less gross out, a little less specific to adults. I feel like Rocco is just more universally appealing overall. And it's just so fun and funny. And to me, it definitely holds up to today. I watched it, like I said, last year, and it was awesome. A great experience. I really, really had a good time rewatching it. Alright, so that's it for our Twitter polls, actually. But before we move on to my Golden Glow Award, which I'll remind you guys what that actually means and what that is, I want to go through some recommendations. And of course, my first one, I have to give a shout out one more time to the great guys, Joey and Andrew, and all their friends and guest co-hosts at Big Orange Couch. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this video. You guys are so eloquent when it comes to 90s Nick, and I love the way you guys break it down every week on your podcast. Check them out, guys. Again, Big Orange Couch, any podcasting platform. You can find them on Twitter at BOC Podcast. And again, you can find them on Instagram at Orange Couch Podcast. They're active on both Twitter and Instagram, and you could find them there. Really cool guys, really fun show, and just very well researched. Alright, and now I just discovered this documentary, which aired not very long ago. It's called The Orange Years. It is so good, and you could rent it right now on Amazon. You can rent it on Apple, iTunes. It's amazing. I enjoyed this. Of course, they had so much to cover. I do feel like they kind of glossed over animation, but if you listen to this stream, I kind of heavily covered animation, and we talked more about the Nicktoons. And in my previous video, I kind of talked about both, but this one, we didn't really talk too much live action, but The Orange Years talks plenty of live action, and to me, I do feel like they kind of rush over the animation. But, you know, they only had a certain amount of time, so they really just had so much to cover, and I don't blame them. Again, like I said already 3 times in the stream, you could talk 90s Nick for years and still have more to say. And look at that nice poster. Again, just search for The Orange Years where you could rent stuff, and you'll be able to find it. And so here, I want you guys to look at the poster. Look at this artwork. Very neat. You've got Little Pete's hat. You've got the orange soda. You got Olmec. You got the log. You got the flame from Are You Afraid of the Dark? The salute your shorts, you know, on the flagpole. All kinds of stuff. You got the horseshoe from Hey Dude. You got the little belt thing that Doug wore when he was Quail Man. So lots of cool little visuals on this poster. The movie was great. I give it my highest recommendation. Lots of people involved with the channel were interviewed. Keenan was interviewed. Other actors who appeared on the channel were interviewed. Loved it. Alright, then one of my favorite books about 90s Nickelodeon, it's called Nickelodeon Nation. And it's really, really informative. A whole bunch of different essays all about Nickelodeon. And you could find it on Amazon. And the description of the title, Nickelodeon Nation, the history, politics, and economics of America's only TV channel for kids. And again, I can't recommend it enough. I had so much fun reading it. I read it about a year and a half ago, and I still have some chapters to read because most of it is like standalone essays. You don't have to read it all like a novel or anything. But yeah, it's a great examination of Nick from the 90s especially, and so I would recommend it. If you're interested especially in history and, all kinds of stuff about the background of the channel. Alright, Ian Riccaboni, you guys might know him. He's the commentator of Ring of Honor, and he's really, really into a whole bunch of pop culture stuff, and we've had fun in the past talking 90s Nick. So what he recommended to me was this YouTube channel called Pop Arena. They do a series of videos, a whole playlist full. It's called Knickknacks, where they cover Nickelodeon. And they're into the late 80s now, but they cover it year by year. And so check it out if you especially like 80s Nickelodeon. They're eventually going to get to the 90s, but right now they're in the 80s, Ian said. I haven't personally seen it, but I trust Ian's recommendation, so check this channel out for sure. And I think you guys will be pleasantly pleased. And now it's time to see who the second recipient of Kelsi's Golden Glow Award is. And yes, you guys might have heard of the Golden Globes, but this is an award that I'm giving out to a strong woman, a luminary, a woman who lifts up other people, a woman who does things that are revolutionary, a woman that I respect and think is really special. So let's see who gets my second award. So the Golden Glow Award goes to Geraldine Laybourne. And I will say, not every Golden Glow Award will have something to do with the topic of my video, but it just so happens that Geraldine was involved with 90s Nickelodeon. She was the president throughout the 80s and 90s at Nickelodeon. And really, if you watch the Orange Years documentary, you'll hear how many people basically attribute Nickelodeon's meteoric rise to success to Geraldine Laybourne. She's incredible, she's talented, she's revolutionary, she's got a lot of great ideas, and she was such a huge part of the success of 90s Nickelodeon. I think she elevated Nickelodeon as a brand, a company, and a channel. She was a visionary there, was instrumental, like I said, at sparking creative ideas that had never been tried on television before. Thus, to me, she was a big part of the changing of the landscape of children's TV as a whole, which subsequently affected the entire evolution of the television business. She just seems like an all-around nice, lovely, and not to mention cool person, and she's also interviewed on that documentary, The Orange Years. Check it out to find out more about her. She's just very instrumental about especially Nicktoons and the impetus of the original animated show on Nickelodeon, but also the live action side of Nickelodeon as well. Literally everything about Nickelodeon she touched in the 90s because, like I said, she was the president of Nickelodeon, and she really just had some great ideas. The way her coworkers and the people who worked under her at Nickelodeon talk about her in that documentary, The Orange Years, is just glowing. They have so many good things to say about her, and they, like I said, attribute much of the success of the channel to her, her vision, and her leadership. And if you look and research about Geraldine, she describes herself as a serial entrepreneur. Not only was she president of Nickelodeon during the time where it was most successful, she also later became the chairman and CEO of Oxygen Media from 1998 to 2006, and that, of course, is Oprah Winfrey's channel. And the cool thing is, she was just inducted into the Television Academy's Hall of Fame at the very beginning of 2020. So literally, she's so revolutionary that the Television Academy recognized her and put her in their Hall of Fame. And I think that's a big deal. Shows how monumental her contribution is to television history. And she also recently co-founded Day One Early Learning Community, a project aimed at creating a model for early learning opportunities for kids 0 to 4 in Poughkeepsie. Alright, and I do want to show you guys this cool thing. So back in the 90s, there was Nick Magazine. If you guys remember, Nick Magazine was so flippin' cool. I love looking at old Nick magazines. I wish I still had more from my childhood, because it was a thing I really liked back in the day. But the cool thing was you could write into Nick and ask Geraldine, the president of the entire channel, a question as a kid. It was so cool that they did this. They called it Ask the Boss Lady. And let me show you guys a few of these excerpts from Nick magazine. It's so cool. So here's one, Ask the Boss Lady, and kids would just write in questions and she would pick a few and answer them in Nick magazine. And again, I want to say thank you to the Nickelodeon fandom wiki. That is where I found these pictures of the Nick magazine, and so cool. So there's one, here's another, a more vertical layout of Ask Boss Lady, where she's sitting at a big table and like kind of like a throne. So cool. Just the design of the magazine itself was cool. And this went on for years. Here's Ask the Boss Lady from a later year. You could see her hair is different in this one versus the other one. It's a little longer. But look how cool it's laid out in the magazine. And I love this idea that kids could write in and ask whatever they wanted of the person who ran the whole flippin' channel. How unique is that? Only Nick. You know, as Joey and Andrew kind of said, Nick really never felt like it was talking down to you. It always kind of wrapped its arms, its TV arms around you and held you close and said, you're a kid, it's okay to be a kid. It's okay, we're not talking down to you, we're with you. And that's what it really felt like. So props to Geraldine for coming up with that whole mentality of being with a kid, not talking to a kid what a kid should be, not kind of making the rules of how childhood should go, but really just going with the flow of what childhood was really like. Because some kids, she even says this in the documentary, some kids really were going through a tough time. Childhood's not fun for everybody. Some kids needed an escape, and that escape sometimes was Nickelodeon. So I think it was really made into a safe, fun place and an entertaining place for kids to get lost, for kids to forget about everyday real life, and for kids to feel okay about who they were and what they liked. So, I don't know, Nick holds such a special place for me, for a lot of people, like we heard Joey and Andrew say as well, and a lot of their friends who also appear on their podcast talk about how special it is to them too. So again, thanks to them one more time. Thanks to Kristen. Thanks to Warren for letting me do these videos that aren't even wrestling related. Thank you guys so much for having faith in me and for giving me an opportunity to talk about stuff I love, like 90s Nick. How much fun is that? Thank you guys. I can't thank you enough. And if you guys disagree with any of the results of any of the polls, please comment your picks below in this YouTube video. I want to see what you guys recommend. And like I said, one more little selfish plug. Check out my YouTube channel, Super Kicking It with Kelsi, for my first 90s Nick video. It's called Kelsi Likes 90s Nick. It's right on the homepage. If you scroll down, you could see my Kelsi Likes playlist. It's on there. And I'm really proud of that video. It had a lot of fun graphics like this video did. And it's just fun to talk about 90s Nick no matter when I talk about it. And again, we talked more live action in my other stream. But in the future, I do want to remind you guys, I will be talking more about 90s Nick. So follow me on my YouTube channel. But some of the things I'll be talking about in the future includes, take a look at this. All the different types of Nickelodeon logos. I kind of referenced this earlier in this video. So many different shapes. Look, you can't even see it. They're all so small. Look how many different shapes they put the Nickelodeon logo in. All kinds of stuff. As you can see, a plane, an arrow, a ribbon, a bat, a test tube, all kinds of different splats, the blimp, a boxing glove, sunglasses, taxi cab. I mean, we're just brushing the surface. Look, there's even more that you see on your screen. And even Nick Jr. had really unique logos. That was something that Nickelodeon really excelled at. And if you watch the Orange Years, they talk about how, you know, the people who designed the MTV logo also designed the Nick logo back in the 90s. And they felt like the Nick logo should be kind of like an animated, moving, kind of fluid thing. Like you didn't have to have the logo look the same and be static all the time. And that's something that was great about the channel, was the logo was not only in different shapes, but it moved around. It was in all these commercial bumpers in a very creative and unique way each time. So man, props to the artists behind the scenes who do this stuff and did this stuff back in the day. Incredible. And again, look at all those flippin' logos. So cool. If I could draw, man, back in the 90s, if I was older too, because I wouldn't have been old enough to work there, but man, how fun would it have been back in the day if you were old enough to work at 90s Nick? It'd be incredible. Or just to be able to draw would be kind of fun, in my opinion. And that's why I love animation. I really just love the talent and skill it takes. It's so impressive what these animators do with their hands, drawing stuff out. It comes from the pencil in their hand and it comes to life and jumps out at you. And Nick brought us a lot of great stuff that came to life for us in our hearts, and also some stuff that jumped out from the screen that wasn't animated, that was live action. So thanks, Nick. And again, check out my YouTube channel. I will be discussing this stuff in the future. And you can, again, find me here, Super Kicking It with Kelsi, Kelsi. Just search that on YouTube, and you will be able to find me, to find more future 90s Nick talk. I can't tell you when, but eventually. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And again, also subscribe to Bell to Bells. Please, they're so nice to let me do this pop culture themed video series. It's been a lot of fun so far. If you guys missed, the first one was about Seinfeld. So if kids TV in the 90s wasn't your jam, if you wanted to see some more adult stuff, check out the Seinfeld stream. And here's a little connection fact that I did reference before in my first Nickelodeon video on my channel. So Artie, the character from Pete and Pete, was played by a man named Toby Huss. Well, Toby Huss was a side character on Seinfeld. He appeared in one episode as the Wiz. So Toby Huss played both Artie from Pete and Pete on Nickelodeon, and he also played the Wiz. I am the Wiz. I am the Wiz. And he walked like that. Well, anyway, on Seinfeld. So, yes, excuse the stupid walk, but that is what the Wiz did. And it really was so reminiscent of how he played Artie. So he played, I think, the Wiz and Artie very similar, and that they were over the top and, like, kind of insane. So I love that connection. So funny. So you might think there's nothing in common besides both of those things being in the 90s, Nick and Seinfeld. Nope, there's more in common than just that. So there you go. Some fun facts to end the show. And again, thank you all so much for watching. Please leave a like for Bell to Bells on this video. And again, one last time, please subscribe. It would mean a lot to all of us at Bell to Bells. Appreciate you guys for watching. And again, comment your favorite 90s Nick stuff below, especially... How about let's create some discussion about live 90s Nick, and we could do a future video about that. Again, thanks guys. See you later, blowholes.